are not our own, because you saw the pressure. What were the initial things that you saw that really people were trying to develop themselves, if you will?
Right. So, as you said, being in the front lines, meeting with college students so often, as I just mentioned earlier, I wanted to do a project that sort of flattened the way we understand this, because there are kinds of books that sort of say the problem is out there. The world out there really has a lot of problems, and let's diagnose the problems with the world out there. And it seemed to me that while there are a lot of problems out there, the church has, in many ways, without knowing it, bought into a lot of these things. And so this book, what I like to tell people is, if you read this book and you don't feel any conviction, if you don't see yourself in the problems that I describe in this book, then you're probably not reading it carefully enough. And so, for example, with a lot of the students that I work with, they're raised in the church, they're taught in the church, they know the Bible. And yet, for example, when they get to the point where they're about to graduate, they feel tremendous pressure to choose the one right career path that will validate their lives. It's not just, I need to be circumspect and wise in the career that I choose. It's that their career is going to define their identity. It's that career is going to be what gives them worth and purpose and value and makes them who they are. I also see young people who are obsessed with social media, who get caught up with the algorithm, with posting, who are desperate to know who they can be, and who, through their fashion, through their clothing, through their activities, are trying to be someone significant. And of course, it's not just young people, right? I mean, and it's not just social media. Some philosophers, specifically Charles Taylor and some other, call expressive individualism. So it's this idea that in order to have an identity, you have to do two things. On the one hand, you have to express that identity. And on the other hand, you have to discover that identity. And you can't do just one or the other. You can't just find out who you are and then keep it hidden to yourself. Like, you've got to find that identity and then announce it to the world. And part of the problem is you can never stop announcing it. You've got to be projecting it constantly and constantly and constantly. And one of the things you mentioned before is it's an unhuman burden. It's this burden of being your own. Well, that's that identity burden. If you're constantly having to project yourself and express yourself, that's a lot to carry. And it's going to overwhelm you. And my students, I certainly see that in my students, but you can see this in a middle-aged person too, right? So totally hypothetically, you could be someone who, let's say, really loves fishing. And you might be somebody who thinks, I'm unlike young people, right? I'm not really on social media. I don't care about my fashion. I'm just wearing my old Bass Pro Shop, hat and shirt that's all tattered. But whenever I meet someone, I feel this compulsion. I've got to talk about my fishing. I've got to talk, I've got to announce to them, right? This is what I'm really into, right? And that's still fundamentally about this expressive individualism. There's this craving to announce yourself to other people. And if you don't announce what you're into, you kind of feel like you don't exist. What I think of is that scene in Back to the Future where Marty McFly's siblings start to disappear, right? That's what I think identity is for people, is if they're not constantly expressing themselves, they feel like they're disappearing. So that's one of the ways that I found this sort of pressure present in both my students and in broader society that sort of woke me up to these, what I call in the book, responsibilities of self-belonging. And there are many others that I think that create these inhuman burdens that we're all carrying around.